The evening at the resort restaurant was filled with the gentle sound of ocean waves crashing against the shore outside. The golden light of the setting sun poured through the tall glass windows, making the place glow warmly. Guests sat at polished wooden tables, enjoying the quiet luxury of the evening. The staff moved carefully between the tables, carrying trays of food and drinks. Among them was Maya, a young waitress whose calm smile made her stand out. She had been working at the resort for over 2 years, and though the job was not always easy, she was known for her patience and kindness. Maya's day had been long, starting early in the morning with breakfast service for the tourists who came from different countries. She had barely rested before lunch came around, and now, at dinner, her feet ached, but she kept smiling. She had learned that in a place like this, where the rich and powerful visited, the staff had to be twice as polite and twice as careful. Maya understood that many guests were kind, but she also knew that some came with arrogance, believing money gave them the right to treat others poorly. That evening, one guest in particular caught everyone's attention the moment she walked in. She was a tall woman, dressed in a sparkling designer gown that shined under the lights. Diamonds glimmered on her neck and wrists, and her hair was perfectly styled as though she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. She didn't look around with curiosity or appreciation like most guests did. Instead, she looked as though she owned the place. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor as she entered, and the staff noticed her presence immediately. Maya was the one assigned to serve her. She approached with her usual polite smile, holding a menu and greeting her in a gentle voice. But instead of returning the greeting, the wealthy woman barely glanced at Maya. She snapped her fingers, a small but insulting gesture, and said, "Water. Cold. No ice." Her voice was sharp, filled with command rather than request. Maya nodded, still polite, and walked away to fetch the drink. From the very beginning, it was clear the woman was not going to be easy. When Maya placed the water on the table, the woman frowned. "Did I not say no ice?" she demanded, though the glass was exactly as she had requested. Guests at nearby tables looked over, sensing her tone. Maya calmly explained that there was no ice in the glass, but the woman waved her hand dismissively, as though Maya's words were unworthy of her attention. Throughout the evening, the rich woman continued in the same manner. She would call Maya over again and again, sometimes with nothing to ask, just to test her patience. She ordered food but complained about the menu choices, criticizing dishes she hadn't even tried yet. "This resort calls itself 5-star, she muttered loudly enough for other guests to hear. Maya kept her head down, offering polite replies, though inside her heart sank. She knew it wasn't her fault, but the words cut like small knives. The restaurant had grown busier by then. Families sat together laughing, couples clinked glasses, and waiters hurried across the room, but the table with the wealthy woman felt like a storm cloud in the middle of it all. Other guests began to whisper about her behavior. They noticed the way she spoke to Maya, and many frowned, shaking their heads. Yet Maya kept moving gracefully, never letting her frustration show. She had faced difficult customers before, but this woman's cruelty carried something heavier. At one point, Maya served her main dish, carefully setting the plate in front of her. The woman leaned back, lifted her chin, and sneered. "Do you even know how to serve food properly? This is not a cheap diner. This is a resort." Her words were loud, sharp enough that the room went quiet for a moment. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but she managed to whisper, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Please let me know if there's anything else you'd like." The woman smirked as though she had won some game. She picked up her fork, tasted the food, and then said, "Terrible. Take it back." Maya knew the chef had worked hard on that dish. She also knew other guests praised the same meal every night. But she didn't argue. She lifted the plate quietly and walked back toward the kitchen, her shoulders heavy. In the kitchen, the chef noticed her expression and frowned. "Is it that woman again?" he asked softly. Maya only nodded, not wanting to cause more tension. She took a deep breath before heading back out. As she stepped into the dining hall once more, she reminded herself of her mother's words, "Dignity is something no one can take unless you hand it over." Maya held on to that thought like a lifeline. She knew she had to survive this shift, and tomorrow would be another day. But the night wasn't over. The wealthy woman continued to demand, to insult, and to embarrass. Her voice rose louder than the music playing in the background. Other guests grew increasingly uncomfortable, some whispering to one another about how the resort should step in. But Maya kept moving, her face calm, even though inside she felt like crying. The contrast between Maya and the woman became more and more visible as the night went on. Maya, with her tired but genuine smile, represented grace under pressure. The rich woman, with all her jewelry and expensive clothes, showed only arrogance and coldness. People began to notice the difference, and while they felt sympathy for Maya, they felt nothing but irritation toward the wealthy guest. By the time the clock reached late evening, the tension in the restaurant was thick. Maya's patience was being tested to its limit. The wealthy woman leaned back in her chair, her voice dripping with mockery as she asked, "Do you enjoy this job? Serving people like me all day?" Her laughter followed, empty and cruel. Maya stood there for a moment, holding a tray in her hands. She forced herself to answer softly, "I enjoy making guests feel welcome, ma'am." It was all she could say without letting her voice shake. What neither Maya nor anyone else in that restaurant knew at that moment was that the night was about to take a shocking turn, one that would not only change the way people saw the wealthy woman but also reveal the quiet strength inside Maya that nobody had expected. The evening had started like any other shift for Maya, with smiles and the hope of kindness. But as the night unfolded, it became clear that something deeper was at play. This was not just about serving food, it was about dignity, respect, and the human spirit. And before the night ended, every person in that restaurant would witness a moment they would never forget. The night at the resort restaurant grew heavier as the rich woman's behavior became more cruel. Guests had already noticed her arrogance in the first hour, but as time went on, her actions moved from simply rude to openly humiliating. The waiters whispered in the corners, warning each other to avoid the table if they could. But Maya had been assigned to serve her, and no matter how difficult it became, she kept her soft smile, her tray steady in her hands, and her voice gentle. When Maya returned with the woman's food for the second time, she placed the plate carefully on the table. The smell of roasted vegetables and grilled salmon filled the air, the kind of dish that normally brought compliments. But the woman only wrinkled her nose. She didn't even taste it before speaking loudly enough for several tables to hear. "This is what passes for fine dining," she said mockingly. "I could have cooked better food at home. Did you even tell the chef what I wanted, or do you people just not listen?" Maya's heart sank, but she lowered her eyes and said softly, "I will inform the chef, ma'am. Would you like me to bring you something else?" The woman leaned forward, eyes flashing. "What I would like," she said, "is for you to stop standing there like a fool. Move." The words struck Maya harder than she wanted to admit. She took a small step back, her chest tight, but she did not let the tears form. She had promised herself long ago never to give cruel people the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her steps quiet but steady. In the kitchen, the chef looked at her with concern. "Again?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Maya nodded. "She says the dish isn't good." "She didn't even taste it," Maya said softly. The chef sighed, shaking his head. "You're doing everything right. Some people they think money makes them bigger than others." Maya forced a small smile. "It's fine. I can handle it." But could she? That question stayed in her mind as she prepared to walk back out. At the same time, in the restaurant, other guests were talking quietly. A family at one table whispered about how badly the woman was behaving. A couple near the window shook their heads, one of them muttering, "That poor waitress. She doesn't deserve this." Even the pianist, playing soft background music, seemed distracted by the tension. Maya returned to the woman's table with patience, asking politely if she would like to try another dish. Instead of answering, the woman laughed cruelly. "Do you know why people like you stay in jobs like this? Because you are not good enough for anything else." Her voice carried, and this time, almost everyone in the restaurant heard. The room grew awkwardly quiet. Maya froze for a moment, her cheeks burning, but she managed to say, "I am here to serve, ma'am. Would you like another option from the menu?" The woman leaned back, eyes full of superiority. "No. Just stand there and wait until I decide." She waved her hand as though Maya were a servant in an old movie. Maya lowered her eyes but remained calm, holding her tray with both hands. Minutes passed, and then the woman finally spoke again. "Bring me dessert. But hurry. And make sure it's done properly. I don't trust you to get even that right." Maya nodded and walked away. Inside, she felt a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, and exhaustion. She wondered why some people found joy in hurting others. Yet she also knew she could not let herself break. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of her mother's wisdom: respect yourself even when others don't. That's how you keep your strength. Back at the woman's table, when Maya returned with the dessert, the situation worsened. Maya placed the plate gently on the table, but the woman suddenly raised her voice again. "What is this? Are you blind? This isn't what I asked for." She pushed the plate back roughly, making the silver fork rattle against the dish. Several guests gasped at the force of it. Maya calmly explained, "This is the chocolate souffle you ordered, ma'am. It is the resort's specialty." But the woman shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "Specialty? Do you think I came here for your cheap tricks? You can't even do something as simple as serving dessert. Pathetic." Her voice was so loud that even people at the far end of the restaurant stopped eating for a moment. The whispers turned into open stares. Everyone could see what was happening now: a wealthy woman using her status to humiliate someone who had done nothing wrong. Maya stood silently, her tray at her side. She wanted to disappear, but instead she held her ground. She said softly, "I'm sorry you are unhappy, ma'am. I can ask the chef to prepare another dessert if you like." The woman scoffed. "You don't even know how to apologize properly. You're a disgrace." It was then that something happened that made the entire restaurant freeze. The woman suddenly stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor with a loud screech. She towered over Maya, glaring at her. Without warning, she raised her hand and pointed a finger in Maya's face. "Listen to me," she said sharply, "I paid to be here. I don't need your excuses. You're nothing but a servant. Remember that." Her words sliced through the air like knives. Maya's chest tightened, and for the first time that evening, her hands trembled slightly. She lowered her gaze, not because she agreed, but because she was fighting to keep her emotions under control. Around the room, other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A man at one table whispered to his wife, "This is going too far." A young woman muttered, "Why isn't the manager doing something?" But no one moved yet. Everyone watched, waiting, shocked by the cruelty unfolding before them. The rich woman smirked, satisfied with herself, and sat back down. She picked up her glass of wine, took a sip, and said loudly, "This is what happens when places like this hire people who don't belong." Maya stood frozen for a few seconds, her throat tight. But then she turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, her steps steady. In the kitchen, she placed her tray down and leaned against the counter for a moment. She didn't cry, though her heart ached. She simply breathed deeply, reminding herself again and again that her worth was not defined by that woman's words. What Maya didn't know was that the eyes of the restaurant had followed her as she walked away. Guests exchanged looks of anger and sympathy. Many silently agreed that the wealthy woman had crossed a line. The staff, too, whispered among themselves, debating whether someone should finally step in. But Maya returned once more, because she was determined to finish her shift with dignity. She adjusted her uniform, lifted her chin, and walked back into the dining hall. The woman smirked when she saw her. "Back again? Good. At least you know your place." The cruel words echoed in Maya's ears, but deep inside, something was beginning to change. She was tired of being treated like she was less than human. Her patience, stretched so far, was reaching its breaking point. And though no one could see it yet, the moment was coming, the moment when Maya would no longer endure the humiliation silently. The night was moving toward a turning point that would leave everyone in the restaurant stunned. The atmosphere in the resort restaurant had grown tense, heavy, and uncomfortable. Guests no longer enjoyed their meals the way they had earlier. Many of them kept glancing at the wealthy woman's table, whispering about her harsh words and cruel behavior. They had watched Maya endure insult after insult, and though Maya remained calm, it was clear the situation was becoming unbearable. What no one expected, however, was that the night was about to change in a way no one could forget. The wealthy woman leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine with arrogance. Her eyes followed Maya as she walked by with another tray of food for a different table. Instead of minding her own business, the woman sneered loudly enough for others to hear, "Look at her walk, slow, clumsy, and useless." The guests at the nearby table frowned, one woman whispering, "She's just being cruel now." Maya ignored the remark, forcing her feet to stay steady. But inside, her patience was stretched thin. She had endured hours of this treatment, telling herself to remain professional, to not react, to stay calm. Yet she could feel something inside her, something tired of being pushed down again and again. The turning point came a few minutes later when Maya returned to check on the woman's table. She approached politely, her voice soft. "Is there anything else you would like, ma'am?" The woman set down her glass and looked directly at Maya with cold eyes. "Yes. I'd like you to finally learn how to do your job. How hard is it to bring food and stand quietly? People like you should be grateful just to serve people like me." The words were sharp, cruel, and unnecessary. The restaurant went silent. Even the piano music in the corner seemed to fade, as though the pianist had stopped playing. Everyone waited for Maya's response, but she simply stood still, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The woman wasn't satisfied with Maya's silence. She suddenly stood up, her chair screeching across the floor. She moved closer to Maya, her face filled with anger. Then, in a shocking moment, she raised her hand and slapped Maya across the face. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a thunderclap. Guests gasped loudly. Some even stood up in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. A child sitting with his parents whispered, "Why did she do that?" His father shook his head, unable to answer. Maya froze. Her cheek stung, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. She had been insulted with words all evening, but now the humiliation had become physical. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her, waiting to see what she would do. The rich woman, however, smirked with satisfaction, as if she had won. She looked around proudly, as though expecting the world to side with her because of her wealth and power. She leaned closer to Maya and said in a mocking tone, "Now maybe you'll remember who you're dealing with." But what happened next stunned everyone. Maya, who had stood silently through hours of insults, slowly straightened her back. Her eyes, filled with calm strength, met the woman's. For the first time that night, Maya did not look away. She did not shrink back. Instead, she stood tall, her presence commanding in a way no one had seen before. The wealthy woman frowned, confused. She was used to people backing down, not standing up. "What are you staring at?" she snapped. And then it happened. In one swift movement, Maya lifted her hand and struck the woman back. The sound of the slap echoed just as loudly as the one before. The restaurant gasped again, but this time the gasp was followed by something else: applause. At first it was just a few claps, hesitant and soft. But within seconds, more and more guests joined in. Soon the entire restaurant was filled with the sound of people cheering and clapping. The wealthy woman stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek. Her eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever dared to stand up to her, not like this, not in public. Her arrogance crumbled instantly, replaced by shock and fear. She looked around, expecting the crowd to support her, but instead she saw only disapproving stares. Every guest, every waiter, even the pianist had stopped to applaud Maya's courage. Maya did not smile, nor did she gloat. She simply stood there, calm and composed, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She had not acted out of cruelty but out of self-respect. She had reached her limit, and she had reminded the woman and everyone watching that dignity could not be stolen. The manager rushed forward, his face serious. Guests held their breath, wondering what he would do. But instead of scolding Maya, he turned to the wealthy woman. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "your behavior tonight has been unacceptable. This resort does not tolerate disrespect or cruelty toward our staff." The woman's mouth dropped open. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The manager did not flinch. "I don't care who you are. You are no longer welcome here. Please leave immediately." Gasps of approval rose from the guests. Some even shouted, "That's right, and good decision." The wealthy woman's face turned red with humiliation. She tried to protest, but the sound of clapping and voices of support for Maya drowned her out. Realizing she had lost, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. Her heels clicked angrily against the floor, but no one moved to stop her. No one offered her sympathy. She walked out alone, her arrogance shattered. Meanwhile, Maya stood quietly, her hands at her sides. The manager placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," he said softly. "You stood up for yourself. And I am proud of you." Guests continued clapping, some even standing up to give her an ovation. A woman from one of the tables called out, "You're brave." Another man added, "You handled yourself with dignity." For the first time that night, Maya allowed herself to smile, though it was a small and humble smile. She felt relief wash over her. She had not wanted to cause a scene, but she had also known she could not let herself be treated as less than human. As the restaurant settled back into calm, guests began to eat again, though the energy was completely different now. The pianist returned to his keys, playing a gentle tune, almost like a celebration of Maya's strength. The staff moved around with renewed energy, inspired by what they had witnessed. Maya continued working, but now guests spoke to her with warmth, thanking her for her service and offering words of encouragement. She realized that though the moment had been painful, it had also revealed something important: that when you stand up for yourself with dignity, the world notices. The slap had been shocking, yes. But what lingered in the air was not violence, it was respect. Maya had reclaimed her dignity, and in doing so, she had taught everyone in that room a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. That night was no longer just about a meal at a resort restaurant. It had become a story of courage, of strength, and of a quiet soul who showed the world that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. The restaurant was still buzzing with energy after the shocking moment. Guests whispered to one another, some still clapping, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The sound of the slap, Maya's bold response, and the wealthy woman's stunned expression replayed in everyone's minds. It was not something they expected to see in a quiet, elegant resort restaurant. yet it had unfolded right in front of them. Maya stood tall, her hands steady at her sides. Her cheek still carried the sting of the first slap, but her spirit no longer felt heavy. She had carried herself with patience for so long, and when the wealthy woman had crossed the final line, Maya had shown she was not weak. She hadn't shouted or caused chaos. She had simply reminded everyone that respect had limits. The room seemed to hold its breath as the manager stepped forward to handle the situation officially. The wealthy woman, her face flushed red, still stood frozen. She looked around the room, searching for sympathy, but all she saw were cold stares. Guests whispered openly now, their words cutting her deeper than any reply Maya had given. A young man at one table muttered, "She deserved that." An older woman whispered to her husband, "What kind of person thinks they can treat others like that?" Everywhere she turned, the wealthy woman saw disapproval. The manager, a tall man with years of experience handling difficult guests, addressed her firmly. His voice was calm, but it carried authority. "Ma'am, your behavior tonight has caused distress to both our staff and our guests. We cannot and will not allow such treatment of anyone in this resort. I must ask you to leave immediately." The woman's eyes widened. She was not used to being spoken to this way. "Do you know who I am?" she snapped, her voice shaking. "Do you realize the kind of influence I hold? I could have this place shut down." But the manager did not flinch. He had seen wealthy guests before, people who thought money could buy them everything, even the right to disrespect others. He folded his arms and said, "Influence does not excuse cruelty. This resort values dignity, not arrogance. Our guests come here for peace, not to witness humiliation. You will leave now." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The wealthy woman's mouth opened as though she wanted to argue further, but the steady gaze of the manager and the cold eyes of the guests around her silenced her. She realized she had lost her power in that room. With trembling hands, she grabbed her designer purse from the table. Her heels clicked angrily against the marble floor as she stormed toward the exit, muttering under her breath. But even her muttering could not drown out the clapping that started again, this time louder, stronger, united. Guests applauded not just Maya but also the manager, applauding the fairness and courage to stand against arrogance. The wealthy woman's face burned as she reached the doors. No one offered her pity. No one called after her. She walked out into the night, swallowed by her own humiliation. Back inside, the restaurant felt lighter, as though a storm cloud had passed. Guests smiled at Maya, some even nodding in respect as she moved quietly back toward the staff area. Her co-workers rushed to her, whispering words of support. One young waiter said, "I've never seen anything like that. You were amazing." Another added, "You stood up for all of us tonight." Maya gave a small smile, though her heart was still racing. She had never imagined such a moment would happen to her. All she had wanted was to finish her shift with dignity, but instead, she had been forced into a situation where she had to defend herself. Now, though, instead of regret, she felt a quiet pride. The manager approached her again, his tone softer now. "Maya, are you all right?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm fine." "You handled yourself with more strength than most people could," he told her. "You kept your dignity even when she tried to take it from you. I want you to know you have the full support of the staff and this resort." Maya's eyes grew misty, but she quickly blinked back the tears. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now. She simply nodded, grateful for his words. As the night continued, the restaurant returned to its rhythm, but the energy was different. Guests treated the staff with extra kindness, smiling, saying thank you more often, and even leaving larger tips. It was as though the incident had reminded them of something important, that behind the uniforms and trays were people with hearts, people deserving of respect. At one table, a little girl tugged at her father's sleeve and asked, "Daddy, Why did that lady hit the waitress? Her father leaned down and whispered, because she forgot to be kind. And when you forget kindness, you forget what really matters. The girl nodded seriously, then looked at Maya with admiration. At another table, an older couple asked Maya about her life, wanting to know her story. Maya answered politely, but she kept it simple. She wasn't looking for attention. She didn't want to become the center of gossip. She just wanted to continue her work, quietly and with dignity. But whether she wanted it or not, her act of courage had already spread. Guests began to tell each other the story in their own words, adding little details, exaggerating the drama, turning it into something unforgettable. By the next morning, people across the resort would know what had happened in that restaurant. For Maya, though, the most important part wasn't the applause or the attention. It was the realization that she had stood up for herself, that she had not allowed cruelty to crush her. She had proven not only to the wealthy woman but also to herself that kindness was not weakness. Later that night, when the shift ended and Maya walked out of the restaurant, the night air felt fresh and cool against her skin. The stars shone brightly above, as if the universe itself was reminding her that no matter how dark a moment might seem, light would always return. She walked slowly along the resort's garden path, replaying the evening in her mind. The slap, the shock, the applause, all of it felt unreal. Yet what stayed with her most was the look on the guests' faces. They had seen her strength. They had witnessed dignity in action. That, she thought, was more powerful than anything money could buy. And somewhere in her heart, Maya knew this was not just a moment for her alone. It was a moment for every person who had ever been treated unfairly, for every worker who had ever been looked down upon. Her act had spoken for them too. Inside the restaurant, long after Maya left, the staff cleaned up and prepared for the next day. But their conversations that night weren't about the food or the music. They were about Maya, the waitress who had faced cruelty and stood tall. They smiled as they spoke of her, their respect for her deeper than ever. The wealthy woman was gone, her arrogance left behind like a shadow. But Maya remained, stronger, braver, and with her dignity intact. The story of that night had just begun to spread, and its lesson would echo far beyond the walls of the resort. The night had finally ended, but the story of what happened inside the resort restaurant was only beginning to take on a life of its own. By the next morning, whispers about Maya's courage had spread across the resort like fire carried by the wind. Guests who had witnessed the shocking scene told others about it during breakfast, adding details about the wealthy woman's arrogance and Maya's quiet strength. Some described the moment with wide eyes and dramatic voices, while others spoke softly, filled with respect. But in every version of the story, one thing was clear: Maya had defended her dignity when no one expected it. When Maya woke the next morning, her body still ached from the long shift, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in a long time. She looked at herself in the mirror, touched her cheek gently where the slap had landed, and whispered to herself, "I stood tall." Those words became a quiet reminder that she had chosen not to let herself be broken. She got ready for her next shift, tying her hair neatly, pressing her uniform, and putting on the same warm smile she always carried to work. As she walked through the resort corridors, staff members she passed greeted her with unusual warmth. Some patted her shoulder, some simply nodded in respect, and a few whispered, "We're proud of you." Maya felt a blush rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to so much attention. For her, what had happened was not about fame, it was about holding on to her self-respect. But it warmed her heart to know that others understood the importance of that moment too. In the restaurant that morning, guests continued to talk about the previous night. Some even asked the staff for Maya by name, just to thank her personally. A family who had been sitting nearby during the incident invited her over to their table when she brought their breakfast. The father shook her hand firmly and said, "You taught us something last night. My children saw what it means to have courage, and I thank you for that." Maya smiled shyly and replied, "I only did what I felt was right." The little boy at the table grinned and said, "You were like a superhero." His sister nodded eagerly, adding, "Yes, you were brave." Their innocent words touched Maya's heart more deeply than they would ever know. She thanked them kindly before continuing with her work. Meanwhile, the wealthy woman who had caused all the trouble had left the resort early in the morning. Her pride would not allow her to stay another night in a place where she had been publicly humiliated. Guests saw her leave with her luggage, her head bowed, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. No one stopped her, no one wished her farewell. She disappeared as quickly as she had arrived, leaving behind only the memory of her arrogance. But for Maya, the story was not about the woman's departure, it was about what remained. A sense of unity had grown among the guests and staff. People treated one another with more patience and kindness. Waiters were thanked more often, chefs were praised for their meals, and even the cleaning staff received smiles and greetings from guests who normally would have ignored them. It was as if the entire resort had been reminded of something simple but powerful: respect is the foundation of every human connection. That afternoon, the resort manager called Maya into his office. She walked in nervously, wondering if she was in trouble despite everything that had happened. But the manager stood up, smiled warmly, and extended his hand. "Maya," he said, "I want to thank you personally. Last night was difficult, but you showed strength and composure that inspired everyone here. I've had more guests compliment you than I can count." Maya lowered her eyes modestly. "Thank you, sir. I only wanted to do my job." The manager shook his head. "You did more than your job. You reminded us all of something bigger. I am giving you a raise, effective immediately. And more than that, I want to consider you for a supervisory role. You've proven you have the character and leadership we value here." Maya's eyes widened with surprise. She had never imagined that standing up for herself would lead to recognition like this. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "Thank you, sir. This means so much to me." The news of her promotion spread quickly among the staff. Her co-workers clapped for her, hugging her warmly and saying she deserved it. Some even admitted that her bravery had given them hope that if they ever faced such cruelty, they too could stand tall. As the days passed, Maya continued working with the same kindness she always had. But now, guests looked at her differently. They saw not just a waitress but a woman of quiet strength. Many stopped her to offer words of respect. Some even wrote kind notes on their receipts, thanking her for her service and for inspiring them. One evening, as she was serving dinner, an older woman called her over. She had been a guest at the restaurant the night of the incident. Holding Maya's hand gently, she said, "My dear, you reminded me of my younger self. I, too, was once in a position where someone tried to humiliate me. But I stayed silent. Watching you stand up for yourself last night healed something in me. Never forget the strength you carry." Maya's eyes grew moist, and she squeezed the woman's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't forget." That night, as the restaurant lights glowed softly and the piano music floated through the air, Maya felt something shift inside her. The shame and pain of being slapped had faded, replaced by pride and peace. She realized that the story wasn't about violence, it was about dignity. It was about reminding herself, and others, that kindness does not mean weakness, and silence does not mean acceptance. In the weeks that followed, the story of the restaurant spread even beyond the resort. Guests carried it home, telling friends and family about the brave waitress who stood up for herself against a wealthy guest. Some shared it on social media, describing Maya as a symbol of quiet strength. Soon, people who had never met her spoke of her with admiration, inspired by the lesson hidden in her story. But Maya didn't let the attention change her. She remained the same kind, hard-working woman she had always been. Each day, she tied her apron, greeted guests with her warm smile, and carried trays with grace. What had changed was not her character but the way people saw her. She had earned their respect, and more importantly, she had earned her own. Late one evening, after another long shift, Maya walked outside to the quiet garden near the resort. The stars sparkled above, and the sound of the ocean waves filled the night. She sat on a bench, closed her eyes, and thought back to that moment when everything had changed. She remembered the sting of the slap, the smirk on the woman's face, the applause from the guests, and the feeling of standing tall. She smiled softly to herself. Life, she knew, would not always be easy. There would be more challenges, more difficult people, more tests of her patience. But now she carried something within her that no one could ever take away, the knowledge that she was strong enough to defend her dignity. And so, the story of Maya, the waitress at the resort restaurant, became more than just an incident. It became a lesson. A lesson that echoed through every person who had witnessed it: never mistake kindness for weakness, and never allow arrogance to silence dignity. Maya rose from the bench, took a deep breath of the cool night air, and walked back toward the staff quarters. Tomorrow would be another day, another shift, another chance to serve with grace. But she would always carry the memory of that night, not as a wound, but as proof of her strength. Her life had changed forever, not because of what someone did to her, but because of how she chose to respond. And in that choice, she had become more than a waitress. She had become an example of courage for everyone who believed they had no voice.